Hello and welcome to the American Theatre Wing Masterclass Series. I'm Megan JENSEN, Director of Programs for the American Theatre Wing. I'm honored to welcome you to today's masterclass, featuring Tony and OBIE Award-winning playwright and Chairman of the American Theatre Wing, David Henry Hwang. And joining David in conversation to start the masterclass is American Theatre Wing President and CEO, Heather Hitchens. I want to thank both David and Heather for being here and welcome all of you joining us. If this is your first time joining us for a masterclass, welcome. We are so glad you can be here to listen and learn in this supportive, creative, equitable community to hear from the luminaries and titans of our industry. For more in-depth details on this series and our other education and professional development programs, please visit our masterclass series webpage. The American Theatre Wing is a non-for-profit organization, and we sustain ourselves on charitable contributions. So if you're in a position to make one, please visit americantheaterwing.org and click on the donate button. If you're not in the position to donate, we understand these are difficult times, but we ask when we release the masterclass recording on YouTube and Facebook, we would so appreciate it if you would share it, comment, and help us spread the joy of live theater and the power of the arts. Today, not only will participants be able to ask questions via the Q&A, but everyone is welcome and encouraged to join David in a hands-on writing workshop. So please grab that notebook, pen, paper, keyboard, tablet, whatever you have for the second half of this session, and be ready to write. In addition, we're so lucky to have an incredible group of artists, playwrights, creatives from our American Theatre Wing family of educational programs to participate on screen, and you will see them later today. A big welcome and thank you for sharing your creativity with us to Rich LAZATIN, AMARA BRADY, ISABELLA DAWIS, Dalen Elsie, Maxine Ford, Kiera Jones, Jupiter Lay, Nick LEUNG, Lauren LOPEZ, Romanti Mata, Jarius Norman, Natasha Nutkovics, Ricky Woodruff, and Kirsten Zundel. And now it is my ultimate pleasure to turn the conversation over to our Wing President and CEO, Heather Hitchens, along with Tony and OBIE Award-winning playwright and Wing Chairman, David Henry Hwang.
Hello, we're thrilled to be here today and have so many people joining us from all over the country and the world. It is my pleasure to be in conversation with the incomparable David Henry Hwang. As I heard what all of you do and the number of students and young professionals that we have joining us, it occurs to me, David, that, learning about established professionals' journey, where it started and what they've learned along the way, I think is always helpful when you're young and starting out. So can you tell us a little bit about when your love of theater started and what you've learned along the way?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to all you folks online that are here and joining us. Really appreciate your participation. So, I'm actually someone who started doing this not so young, but in college. So I didn't grow up in a theater family. I was a violinist. So I would play in the pit orchestra for high school musicals. And I did notice when I was in that capacity that I liked staying after the orchestra was dismissed. I liked listening to the director give notes. So there was always something about theater that I found interesting. But when I was a freshman in college, I went to college in the Bay Area. We went up to San Francisco and saw some shows at American Conservatory Theater, and I began to think, oh, maybe I can do this. So I started writing plays in my spare time. I went to Stanford, which at the time didn't have any playwriting classes, but I found a professor who was willing to take a look at them. He told me they're really bad, which they were, and my problem was that I wanted to write plays, but I didn't actually know anything about the theater. But the same professor was a good guy. He helped me to design a playwriting major and essentially saw as many plays and read as many plays as I could for the next 2 or 3 years. And that basically became my education. The summer before my senior year in college, I was home in Los Angeles and I saw an ad in the paper that said, study playwriting with Sam Shepard. Many of you know Sam Shepard as this amazing Pulitzer Prize winning playwright. He also subsequently became a movie star. But at the time, Sam was just a playwright. And so this was the first year of what eventually became known as the Padre Hills Playwrights Festival. It was a pretty prominent event in Southern California for many years, but this was only the first year that they tried to do it. So there were only 2 of us that applied to be students, so we both got in. And at Padua, Sam and another amazing playwright teacher, Maria Irene Fornez, and other playwrights who were involved with what was called the Theater Genesis movement off Broadway in the 60s. They gathered and we did exercises, and we're going to do one of those exercises today. And they taught me to really write more from my subconscious, to not necessarily understand in a conscious level what I was doing at all time, you know, but being able to reach into the things you don't understand, you know, to do what David Burns talks about, you know, to stop making sense. And once I did that, I found these themes appearing on the page, things that I didn't know I was interested in, like being Asian American, like immigration, like racism. And so, you know, my conscious mind hadn't figured that out yet, but some part of me that was obviously very interested in these subjects. And ever since then, playwriting has been a way for me to explore what I really feel and try to understand the things that my conscious mind hasn't figured out yet. And so I started writing a play. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to see it on its feet. So I staged it in my dorm at Stanford my senior year. And that became my first play, FOB, which through a variety of fortuitous circumstances opened about 14 months later off Broadway at the Public Theater in New York. And that's how I got started.
That's amazing. And it's almost like theater found you. But when you talk about tapping into the unconscious, the subconscious, I mean, that takes a little bit of loosening your grip of control, right?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, so the late Nobel Prize winning playwright Harold Pinter used to talk about the fact you make a deal with your characters. Sometimes your characters do what you want, and sometimes you do what your characters want. And so that tension between the conscious and the subconscious, between craft and impulse, that I think is true of all art. And particularly as it relates to playwrights, for my journey, my conscious mind is always, you know, pretty easy for me to access. But the subconscious, the emotional, the deep stuff, the messy stuff, that's always been hard for me. And that's what playwriting has enabled me to access.
Well, I've done the exercise that you're about to do with this group of young theater students and professionals, and I think it really outlines very well where you fall on the continuum of being able to access those things, and a fascinating conversation. But throughout your professional career, just because I think people starting out want to know, you know, are there mistakes you made? Are there lessons that you learned that you could say, you know, here's something I learned, don't make this mistake, or this is something that you should keep in mind as you start your career?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in general, and I keep having to relearn this lesson, so it's a hard one. But whenever I try to game the system, whenever I try to write the thing that I believe is going to be successful, I usually don't succeed. I only succeed when I write about something that I really care about. And it's like, I don't know if people are going to like it or not. I don't know if it's going to get good reviews. I don't know if it's going to, you know, sell. But I'm writing it because it's important to me. It's something that I need to explore. It's something that I want to say. And that's always my best work. And then whenever I try to do something like, okay, I'm gonna write something commercial, that doesn't really work out. So in a way that's good, because it kind of forces me, if I, whenever I relearn this lesson, it forces me to hold theater in a very kind of sacred place for myself, and to say, this is not something I do because I think other people are gonna like it. It's something I do because I learned something about myself.
I know that you, just because we work closely together, because you're, full disclosure, the chairman of my board. And I know that you write every morning, and talk about how do you write something that you're working on, or do you just write something that you're thinking about? Like, well, what is that process like? Yeah,
so I personally, when I started out, it wasn't like I had a particular time of day that I wanted to write. If anything, I tended to write more like in the early morning and late at night. So I wrote in bed, like I would lie down, which is, by the way, really bad for your back. So I can't do that anymore. Because I wanted to be like closest to the dream state, again, the sort of the whole subconscious thing. And then as I've gotten older and I have kids, and I have different sorts of responsibilities, including the pleasure of getting to be the chair of the board and work with you. I've got to like get it into a particular place. And morning works best for me because I feel like that's when I have the most creative mojo. And I want to, but I personally, I think it's probably for most people, I can't write all day. I can write for, maybe 3, maybe 4 hours, but then that still leaves a lot of hours in the day. So for me, it's using those morning hours, and I really respect people who can write just for fun, who write journals and who write things that they don't know what they're gonna be. I'm not one of those people. I'm like very focused on, okay, this is this, I've got a deadline on this, I've got a deadline on that. And I generally just write scripts. I write all sorts of scripts. I write plays and musicals and movies and operas and, but I don't know how to write prose. I can write an essay, but I don't know how to write a short story or a novel. I don't know how to describe what the tree looked like. I'm really just someone who works on scripts.
So when you're writing on a project, whether it's television or theater, you get notes. Have you ever gotten notes that you disagreed with? I'm sure the answer is yes, but then how do you deal with them?
So I'll tell the story about how, one of the reasons I got my first production is my play, this play that I staged in my dorm for a variety of reasons, including, most interestingly, actually, community activism and pressure. And we can talk about that at some other point. But Joe Papp, who was the founder of the Public Theater and of the New York Shakespeare Festival, and who was still running it at the time, was looking for a play for Asian actors. And my play happened to come across their desk. So I was the beneficiary of affirmative action because Joe was specifically looking to fill a social need. And I got to walk through the door. But Joe, so we did a reading. Joe gave me some notes that I didn't really agree with. But, he was Joe Papp, and I was like 22. So, of course, I wanted him to like me. So I said, so he said, go home, do another draft, and I'll decide if I want to do the play. So I went back to San Francisco where I was living. And, I waited like 3 or 4 weeks, and I sent him back the exact same script. And about 10 days later, the phone rang, and it was Joe Papp, and he was like, okay, the script's great now, we're gonna do it. And that's how I got my first production. So I'm not saying that the answer is always ignore it. I think, most of the time people have a record of what their notes were. But I think it is important to learn how to filter criticism. That is, everybody's going to have, you know, a lot of smart ideas. Hopefully they care about you, they want to make your script better, but ultimately it's your script. And even when I give notes to my students, I'm really clear that, you know, you should, if it doesn't make your heartbeat faster, if what I'm telling you doesn't make you go, yeah, I really want to do that, then just ignore it. Because yeah, I think I have good ideas, but I'm not the one who gets to decide. You're the one who gets to decide.
Well, that filtering of criticism is probably something that's good for anybody, no matter what they do. It's sort of figuring out, you get a lot of advice and everything, but figuring out and trusting your gut about where you're going is, I think, a really important thing to learn that I think you only get more confidence with as you grow older. After your gut has said you've been right a number of times, right?
Yeah. And by the way, sometimes your gut is wrong. So my gut sometimes is wrong, but that doesn't mean, you know, we all need to make mistakes. And, yeah, you know, by definition, if you're doing work which is risky, by definition, sometimes those experiments aren't going to pay off. But that's why it's important to do them. You know, you have to keep going back there.
Well, thank you. I think that's so helpful, and I hope everybody listening is really benefiting from that. Before we get into the workshop with students, I don't want this moment to pass without acknowledging the times we're in, the extraordinary times we're in, and just want to talk a little bit with you because social justice has been at the core of your work for a long time. Equity and inclusion has been something you've been working on for a very long time. And so, you know, as we're in these times, what do you think the role is of theater during these times? And what are our responsibilities as theater makers, producers, administrators, and even lovers of the theater?
Yeah, of course, you know, we all know there is, for the most part, theater is on pause right now. And while that is very difficult and heartbreaking in a lot of ways, it also provides us an opportunity to say, well, wait a second, you know, the impossible happened. And therefore, we can dream about the impossible when we come back. It's not a question of going back to normal, because normal was problematic in a lot of ways. Normal was racist in a lot of ways. Normal excluded many different sorts of people. And so for theater artists, I would say, you know, this is the time when you should dream about the thing that is most you. And I would say this is at any moment, because the thing that makes us different, that makes us unique, that makes us idiosyncratic and weird, that's your superpower as an artist. Because if you write from there, if you create from there, you're making the work that only you can make. And that is more likely to get attention. And it's certainly more likely to be the thing that's more meaningful to you. But I would also say at this moment, you know, it's always good to take risks and to be truthful to yourself. And now I think you can do that with even more confidence that this is the type of work that should be done, that this is what the theater should be doing. And so for those who create, be brave. And for those who support theater, produce theater, be equally brave and responsive to this time. And in this pause, what are we learning? And what are we feeling? And what are we listening to, such that we have a different sense of what normal should be when we get back?
Those are such incredibly beautiful and meaningful words, and it makes it clear to everyone how lucky the American Theater Wing is to have you as our chair. And I think here's to not going back to normal. Here's to creating a new, more equitable theater. And with that, especially as we're about to bring some wonderful students into the room and young professionals. They have all participated in American Theater Wing programs. Some of them are still in school, as Megan said, and some of them have entered the industry and are at the very beginning of their careers. And we are so proud of the young people that we've been able to support and the careers that we've been able to launch. And we're delighted to welcome you into the room to do a playwriting workshop with David Henry Hwang. Come on in.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Heather. It's always an honor to work with you. What a great group of artists. So this is an exercise, and just to give credit where credit's due, yes, it came, I mean, I've modified it a little, but it's basically an exercise that came out of that summer before my senior year in college at the Padre Hills Playwrights Festival. And it is essentially created by Maria Irene Fornes, who was an amazing playwright. She only passed away recently. She was a Latinx playwright from Cuba, and won, I think, 12 OBIEs over the course of her career. And was, I think, the great playwriting teacher of her generation. So this is an exercise that takes place in 2 parts. And the first is fairly straightforward, and then it gets a little, it gets sort of fun and crazy. So what I'd like you to start doing, and those of you who are watching the webinar and not on screen, you can certainly participate in this as well. So it starts out very straightforward. It's really about writing a 2-character scene. And it doesn't matter who these characters are. They can be 2 characters in something that you're already working on. They can be 2 characters based on people you know. They can be 2 characters based on works of, literature, or 2 characters from a TV show. It's whatever you want to do. Sometimes when I do this exercise live, I usually show up with a bunch of magazines, because if you need a prompt and you look at these magazines and you see 2 people that seem, that stir something in you, you can write about them. Because it's, obviously we're doing this on Zoom. If you don't already know who you're writing about and you want to, go on Google for a bit and Google a question or a phrase that interests you, and then go to images and see if you find the images of 2 people that you want to write about. That would be I guess, the equivalent of doing the magazine thing. So say where they are, do a place and a time, and name your characters. And then we're just all gonna write for like 15 minutes, and there'll be a little bit like, Susan Laurie's watch me work thing. But first, let me ask if anybody has any questions. Are those instructions clear? Okay, let's go. Okay. So you can do, you know, like try to get some blood flowing back in your hands. This is why it's difficult to make movies about writers, because actually the process of writing is so internal, there's not that much to look at. But anyway, it's great. It was fun watching you all write. So now we're in the second part of this exercise. What we're going to do is I'm going to start calling out random words and phrases at 50 at 50-second intervals. And what you're going to do, draw a line across the page, or if you're using a computer, you know, just do a line, just indicate that this is where the first part of the exercise stopped. Now you're going to keep writing this same scene. Just keep going with these same characters. But at 50-second intervals, I'm going to call out these random words or phrases. And it's your job to incorporate them into the dialogue. You know, like if you need to use a different verb form or something like that, or like use a singular instead of a plural or whatever, that's fine. But the basic idea is to use these words or phrases in the dialogue. Like you can't put it in the stage directions. That's like cheating. Great. Oh, and thank you. And the Wing is our friends at the Wing are going to keep track of these random words or phrases on their screen. They're sharing their screen. Alicia's sharing her screen. Thank you. And so if you get lost and you forget what they are, Alicia's going to record that for us. And I've got a lot of great suggestions from the Q&A. So if everybody's good to go, all right, start writing. And the first phrase is telephone wire. Hypocrite. Hypocrite. Hypocrite is number 2. Did you shower today? Did you shower today? Smell of tires. Smell of tires. Blue pill, or it could be plural. Blue pills. Pizza Hut. Paradox. And the last one is heartfelt. Great. So playwrights, get to a point when you feel comfortable stopping, but after you've incorporated all the words. And those on the webinar, thank you for your words and phrases. These are all things that were suggested on the Q&A. Great, and Alicia, maybe we can go back to gallery view now. I think everybody's good. So let's just talk about this, because if this were a longer session, we might actually read some of these, but time doesn't permit us to do that right now. But these are clearly two very different types of experiences in terms of what it means to create a work. And I think it says a lot about you as a writer. You can learn about yourself in terms of how the two parts felt to you. So does anyone want to, you can raise your hand or you can use great. AMARA, how did, compare the first half and the second half?
I think that the first half was more like, it's similar to what you were saying about unconscious and like how you have to write from that place. For me, it was because I decided to work on this Greek mythology play that I've been working on. And so writing the second scene, trying to talk about Pizza Hut and everything else, I was like, I don't know that I can make this work. But it brought up a lot of really interesting things for me about like the connections that I'm trying to make in this world that existed before the world we're in now, and how do I make those connections while still acknowledging like the repercussions of those things in this current moment. So that was really interesting to me.
Great. Maxine, did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Yes, I had this feeling in my body that I was driving on the road for the first part of the scene. I was just driving, it was a nice day, and then every time you threw out a word, it was like, stop! And I said, what? Wait, no, I'm trying to get back on the road. I tried to get back on the road and you threw out another word. That is how it felt writing the second part of the scene. So, but it was fun.
And how do you feel about the work itself, the first part to the second part? Do you like
I feel that the second part is more of my authentic voice. Like you were talking about earlier, I had to give up some of my control and kind of just write where the story was taking me instead of trying to put the story on a certain path.
Yeah. Lauren, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I had kind of a similar experience, and it's interesting that you bring that up now, because I think the first half, it kind of stayed a little more general. I was kind of leaving it open to what might happen. And then I don't think that it really took full and really had like depth until we had that second part, where then we started receiving those words, and then the story kind of started to take a life of its own. And it started to just kind of move in a direction that I actually really didn't anticipate at all. That is not how I intended the scene to go when I started it. So it was a weird, like cathartic experience to kind of let go and just let the scene take itself. Kind of how you were talking about making those deals with your characters. I felt like I was driving in the first half and they were driving in the second. So.
Yeah. Rich and then Isabella.
Yeah, similar to Maxine, I was having this sort of, again, like you mentioned, the tension with craft versus impulse, because a lot of the time I was like, I need to make this work. This needs to make some sort of coherent sense, because I was writing about a queer couple. And when we got to the "Did you shower today?" and then right after that was the smell of tires, I'm like, oh, I actually really like that. Like that actually kind of makes some sense, because it's also the subconscious like association that we have with it. And it's like, what do tires mean to that character? What memory does that have for the character? And I think as an actor, when I was reading it, I'm like, this is actually really kind of interesting, because there are a lot of different ways that you can play with it and kind of explore this weird world that we've created.
Hey, Isabella and then Nick.
My adrenaline went up during the second exercise, and the adrenaline my characters did too. Like they started being rude to each other, they were impolite to each other, they were interrupting each other. They would start a thought and then go on a different thought. And I think they and me and I also became much more future oriented. It wasn't about they were concerned about what was going to happen next, and I was too.
Great, Nick.
Yeah, similar to what Isabella was saying, I felt like the urgency kicked in the second part, because in the first part I was writing a lot of, it was these two kids that are uncovering a conspiracy theory. But in the beginning it felt like a lot of setup and I wasn't really going anywhere, and I was having trouble kind of finding the forward motion. And then in the second part, I felt like those little deadlines that you had set up for every 50 seconds kind of also gave the characters deadlines to think up of a new thing to do. And that gave it a lot more action. I actually got to a part where I'm just kind of like, this could work like in a bigger thing. So yeah, that was really cool.
Because I think the most, you know, obviously what this exercise is intended to do is sort of recapitulate that feeling that you have when you're writing through, you know, you're writing, and then that subconscious thing when it's like, I don't know, I've got this impulse to do this thing and I don't know where it's going to go, but it feels kind of exciting, and I feel like you know, I'm gonna let them drive for a while. A couple of the metaphor that a couple of you have used. I remember my second play to be done in New York was called The Dance in the Railroad, and it was a historical play about two railroad workers, Chinese railroad workers, building the American Transcontinental Railroad in 1867, when historically the Chinese railroad workers went on strike. And I've subsequently learned that this is probably the first major, or the biggest labor action that happened in North America up to that time. And you know, you don't normally associate Chinese Americans, Asian Americans with being in sort of social activists and pushing the labor movement. So I wanted to write about that. But I was writing along, and you know, they're like in the railroads, and then all of a sudden I had this impulse that one of them should turn into a duck. And I just didn't know what this would mean. It's like, why would they be ducks? But you know, it felt strong. So I kind of went with it. And then it turned out, oh, you know, one of them used to be an opera actor back in China. And so they were actually doing exercises. And now when I watch the play, I feel like, you know, it's perfectly good up until the point when one of the characters becomes a duck. And then I feel like it really takes off. It really starts to have like a life of its own. And the ability to go with things that you don't understand and take those risks and not be afraid of that is, I think that, going back to the Pinter quote, that's what it means when you let your characters do what they want. And even something as completely random as what we just did. I think most writers find, oh, there's something that was kind of exciting. There's something that I learned about the characters in the second part of the exercise. And many writers feel that the second part of the exercise is better than the first part in terms of the writing itself. So that's just a way to, at least when I did that exercise, and I was 20, 19, one of those, it really opened me up to want to take those risks. And the most exciting thing about being a writer, I think, are those moments when you don't know what's going to happen and you learn something because of that. You learn something about your character, and the most orgasmic thing is when you actually solve a plot issue. There's like, I don't know how I was gonna get out of this, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, I didn't know what I was gonna do, and now I know because I let myself do the thing that I didn't understand. So that's the basic idea here. Anyone on the screen have any more questions about this exercise, conscious, unconscious? Yeah, Maxine.
How do you allow yourself to get into that space as a playwright when you have deadlines and distractions?
Yes, there was that question on the Q&A, and I will get to the Q&A questions at a certain point also. Okay. We might end up going over a little. I've been told it's okay to do that. So, I mean, distractions are one thing, and you know, particularly like when I had kids and when my kids were little, and, you know, we just sort of established that when my door was closed, like, you're not supposed to come in. And so that's one thing. But in terms of, somebody had a question on the Q&A about writer's block and deadlines. So I actually find most of the time that writer's block, I mean, that deadlines are a pretty good remedy for writer's block, because it's like, for me, I'm just like, I have an overly developed pathological sense of responsibility. So it's like, oh my God, this thing's I've got to show something to people in, you know, a week. But I also feel like sometimes we also get writer's block. We all get stuck on things. And it helps me to be working on more than one thing at a time. Because if I get stuck on one thing, and I switch over to something else, I'm probably not stuck on that thing. I mean, it is occasionally possible you can be stuck on 2 or 3 things at the same time, which is kind of horrible. But probably one of them you're excited about getting back to. And then I don't, you know, there's nothing wrong with taking a break from the thing that you're stuck on. Yeah, eventually you have to get back to it probably. But sometimes you just need, you know, your subconscious, your mojo, whatever, just needs a break to recharge. And I think that's okay. But if you want to be keep being productive, it helps to have something else to work on. Nick.
In the similar realm of deadlines, what's your opinion on getting a lot of pieces or a lot of parts of a piece done versus like really marinating on one moment or one piece and like making it as good as it's going to be?
So I personally tend to work on a lot of things at the same time, but only one really kind of personal, it's usually a play. And yeah, and that's what I like to do. But, you know, one of the things I've learned from teaching is that and talking to a lot of the playwrights and having other playwrights visit my classes is that, unsurprisingly, everybody does it a little differently. And there are writers who, I like to start at the beginning and write to the end, but they're amazing writers who like to write bits and pieces, and they don't know where it's going to go. And they kind of figure it out, you know, with their writer's group, or they put it away for a while. So I think just as everybody is unique in what you write about, we all are going to have slightly different processes as well. And so it's your part of your job also to figure out, you know, what works best for you. I know one playwright who is very well known who came to one of my classes who's like, you know, he'll get through the first draft, and then sometimes he'll just like toss all the pages up, you know, and like rearrange them and see what he learns from that. That's not something I personally would do, but it works for that artist. And so there's a wide range of ways to do this. Rich.
Similar to the question, but on the other side of it, as opposed to deadlines, where when we're dealing with lines that are like very alive, like even to the point of like, this might be too much. What is the line between writing something and like personally the playwright loving it versus like an audience member or someone to read the play and be like, this is offensive and this shouldn't be published?
So I feel like the first responsibility, and this is probably unsurprising based on what I've said before, the first responsibility that you have as a writer is to write something that means something to yourself, and that you learn something about yourself and you explore a question that's meaningful. so let's say you get through a draft. Now, probably you would like that draft to be performed because that's what we do as writers. At that point, I think we talked about filtering criticism earlier. And that's when it becomes important to hear the play out loud, to see it on its feet one way or another, you know, even if it's like friends in your living room. I mean, we can't do that right now, but you know. And then you will get notes. People will tell you things, and you need to filter that. If you get a note that says, wow, this is really offensive, then that's something you have to take seriously too. And it may be the case that something you write isn't something that can be shared right now. Or more likely, it's probably not the entire thing. There's probably something, there may be something to consider in terms of specific, a specific plot thing, a specific character, language that's used, and that's worth listening to and thinking about as a note. Before you throw the whole play out, I think it's worth like understanding what the particular criticism is and trying to explain that. And by the way, you know, so I was talking about this play FOB, and it got done at the Public, and there was an Asian American paper at the time that said that it set Asian America back 20 years. And I was only, you know, 22 at the time. So, you know, I think it's important to note that people, particularly from marginalized communities who haven't been represented much, of course they're going to have a greater investment in how those characters are portrayed and how those stories are told. I personally believe it's great to have a wide range of stories, and that people can go, oh, well, I, you know, identify with this, you know, this, say, Asian American writer's work, but I don't like David's work. And that's okay, you know, because the audience is the final piece in the collaboration, and the audience response is important, and that's how the audience decides, like, what work speaks to me and these works don't. And that's why you want to have a wide range of works. I can do, so let's see. Why don't I take one more question from this group, and then I'm going to go to the Q&A because I want to address a few of those questions because we're already a bit over time. Jupiter. Oh, Jupiter and then Lauren. Okay. And the Daylin. So let's do 3 questions. I'll try and answer them quickly, and then I'll go to some of the Q&A questions.
Just wait, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just to hop on Rich's thing about like specifically the audience members, I'm interested in your thoughts on navigating those with hyphenated identities. Like for me, I'm a Vietnamese American, right? And I want to do my Vietnamese community right, but I also want to do my American community right. And it's interesting that like I'm trying to create something that appeals to my parents or my relatives. And how do you, like for you, how do you find that balance? Because I know you did it with The Golden Child, right? And I think that's like an amazing work that could reach both communities, even though like you can have a solid identity of like Chinese American, that's one identity in song, but how do you navigate creating works for both?
So it's a tough question to answer quickly. So, you know, in my most recent show, Soft Power, I have a character singing, I'm not two halves, I'm whole. So I think that the sort of bifurcated identity is is tricky for me. I mean, I don't think I'm like a compendium of things that are in conflict. I think I am one person, right? And I have influences from a lot of different places. So all I can do is express who I am. And some of those works I think are going to appeal to, say, an immigrant generation more than others. And some of those works, and so I kind of try not to think about that too much, because I feel like if I pitch it to one type of audience rather than another, again, I'm gaming it. I'm gaming the system. It's just in a different way. I'm not trying to be commercial. And again, I feel like it's most important to have a wide range of authors so that you have a wide range of experiences and perspectives represented. Lauren.
I actually had a quick question. You mentioned soft power, which I know is one of your more recent works, and it includes music. And I wanted to know if your process in writing a piece like that includes music is different than your process writing a piece without it. Does the music come after? Is it all together? You know.
Yeah, and I think we had a Q&A, a question about that on Q&A too from Patrick Pacheco. Hi, Patrick. So it is different because musicals, unless you are, you know, enough of a genius to be able to write music, lyrics, and book, which, you know, obviously some people can do that. I can't. So it means that you have to have, kind of do a mind meld with a bunch of other artists, with a book writer, lyricist, composer, director, sometimes producer also. And that means you all have to literally get on the same page. So outlines become much more important to me in that context because everybody's got to buy in. And I think within those structures, there's still a lot of room for letting your characters come alive, for letting them do stuff that's unexpected, for accessing the subconscious. But I do outline a musical or a movie for that matter, or a TV show, whereas I wouldn't do that for a play. Daylin, I'm sorry, am I saying your name correctly?
Yes, Daylin. Okay, I have a question. Which one is more important? Okay, have you ever like writing in a vernacular and then reading back over it? You're sometimes programmed to read things like mostly in proper English. So when you try to write in vernacular or slang, it like I'm having this problem where I have to like go back over it to make sure it reads right. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, have you heard it read out loud?
No, not yet. Not yet.
Because I mean, I have written vernacular sometimes, and yes, I feel like a lot of see, like you can write a novel or you can write music, right? And I think playwriting's in the middle because it involves words, but it's also less about, for me, it's less about what the words are on the page and more how they come to life in the air, how they sound. The same way that, you know, music is less about the notes on the staff than how it sounds. So I would recommend that you just get some friends together and hear it. And I think your ear will be able to tell you a lot about what feels real and what feels not.
Thank you.
Okay, I am going to go to the Q&A and try and grab a few of these questions before we end this. How useful are critics? So I like to read critics when I'm still rewriting. Like, in other words, if we do a production out of town and then we're coming to New York and I'm going to continue to rewrite, which I like to do, then it's useful for me to see what critics are saying. Again, I think that it's about filtering criticism. It's about what feels truthful to me. But if all the critics kind of agree on something, then I think I at least need to think about it. Mark Cornfield, did Hillary see or comment on soft power? No, but I've heard that there may be some chance that she might be interested. You know, we're planning to do another iteration of it, and maybe that'll change. Adam Hester, I'm wondering how Mr. Hwang injects humor in a piece after he has a first draft. So I usually don't inject humor per se. I think I try to just follow and be truthful to the characters and the situation, I tend to, I guess, have a tendency to notice things that are funny or quirky. One of the plays of mine that seems that is really considered a comedy is Chinglish. And when I wrote that, for instance, I thought, oh, this is going to be kind of amusing, but not until I heard it read for the first time and people were really kind of busting a gut did I realize that I'd written a comedy. So I don't necessarily try to inject comedy. Mitchell Wise, hi Mitch. When you start with an idea that is important to you, do you not take into account the number of characters, like a big cast, multiple settings? So I have been doing this long enough that I realize, oh, it's going to be easier to get it produced if it has a, a smaller cast and not so many settings. But I kind of don't think it's the idea for me is more important, and so I end up doing something like Soft Power, which requires a 23-piece orchestra. So clearly, I guess I don't care enough to try to make the thing more producible. And by the way, when I talk to artistic directors and literary managers, most of them don't want to be told, oh, you should do this play because it only has 2 or 3 characters, because that's not the reason to write a play. Tony Segala, when writing a fictional play based on a serious personal issue, how do you explore writing the fiction when you don't know how reality will unfold? I find that that's the most exciting time because I don't know what reality is going to unfold. So it gives me the freedom to write whatever I want, and maybe some of those things end up becoming true. For instance, with M. Butterfly, I thought that I was making up the fact that one of the main characters tries to kill himself at the end, and it's based on a true story. And then later on, I found that the actual character really did try to kill himself. Devon Kidd, hi Devon. What's the last new play that you read that had you gobsmacked? So Devon is a student of mine, so it could be one of his, but I'm not allowed to, it would be unfair to other students to say that. So I'm going to say, when I read Christopher Chen's play, Caught, this was maybe 10 years ago, I was like, this play has to be produced. Why is anyone producing this play? So that's an example of, but there's a number of things that I read that I'm like, this play has to be produced. How are we doing on time? 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to do the next 3 questions. How did writing for the theater prepare you and also not prepare you for writing as part of a writing team on a TV series? So I think that playwrights are really valuable in television right now. And I believe it's because we have original voices, and that stuff I was saying earlier about leaning into the thing that makes you original and weird, that happens to be valuable in television right now. So in that respect, I guess my whole life of being a playwright prepared me for working on television. I happen to have worked on a series that was created by a former mentee of mine, a playwright named Sarah Treem, so we got to know each other because of theater. In terms of being in a writer's room, it's a different experience from writing a play on your own. I found that I enjoyed it, that I liked the discussion. I liked kicking ideas around with other writers. And I don't know that being a playwright really prepared me for that, but maybe being a teacher prepared me for that. Mark Garner, you mentioned having students. Do you have any open classes playwrights can apply for, attend? Well, I do run the MFA playwriting program at Columbia. So if you're interested in MFA, you can think about our program. And I sometimes do open classes, such as, like this is kind of one of them, but not on a regular basis. So you kind of can follow, I guess, my website, and then they'll be on there. Elisa Trust, a great book about feedback is Thanks for the Feedback by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. Cool. So last question, David Maglione. How long do you recommend working off an outline? Is there a point in the process where your outline becomes obsolete? So I don't, as I said, I don't write plays off of an outline. In general, when I've talked to playwrights, most of them don't use outlines, but at least one really famous playwright does. So again, you have to find your own process. But in terms of working off an outline, say for a musical, I think there's a time, certainly when the outline can start to feel obsolete, but if it's a musical, again, because you have to get buy-in from everybody else, and you want that buy-in, then it becomes a question of revising the outline and making sure everybody else feels good about it and what's their input. Yeah, so it becomes obsolete, but if it becomes obsolete, then I would revise it. So thanks, everybody. This has been super fun and exciting, and I really appreciate your participation, those of you particularly on screen and all of you who are joining us. Keep writing, keep expressing what's uniquely you, and let's all work to change the American theater. Thank you.